stay with the Eurozone for a moment. There is a sentiment out there that potentially we could see the Eurozone derailing the recovery in the rest of the world and pushing us back into another recession or another leg of the recession and bringing us to what everybody has been frightened about, and that is the double dip scenario. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think we should really be heeding caution at this stage?
Roman, I think a lot of that depends on how well the world's financial leaders handle this crisis. Because if you look at how we were doing prior to this situation in the Eurozone escalating, I would say, we were starting to see good signs of recovery, and they were starting to be sustainable. And the big question mark prior to this was, what was the health of the U.S. consumer? And what was the driver of growth coming out of China? So those two elements, China and other emerging markets, continuing to grow, and the U.S. consumer starting to show some signs of recovery with, housing prices going up, housing sales going up in the United States.
Job traction in the U.S.
Exactly. These things are all starting to point to some traction and some sustainability. But I think that, we all would have to admit that that already was a bit tenuous, but it was reassuring to see the progress. With the situation now in the Eurozone, I think a lot of that depends on how the policymakers are going to handle it. We have known about Greece's situation for several weeks now. There have been discussions about...
Do you think they should have reacted much quicker than we've seen a response from the authorities?
I think hindsight is always perfect, but I think now with hindsight, I would say that perhaps more could have been done sooner. There was an awareness of the situation. There was an awareness of when the debt payments were due on Greece's external bonds. And there was discussions already between the IMF and the other leaders in the Eurozone on what could be done. But I think Greece itself has had to come to the party. And I think, there's plenty of reasons one can explain why we are where we are. But I think what we're looking at now in terms of the downgrading of Greece's debt, the downgrading potentially of other neighboring countries, in Southern Europe of their debt, I think one has to say that policymakers must feel a sense of urgency now, because if they don't come to some conclusion in terms of what the way forward will be, particularly with Greece, this could be a threat to the recovery.
As GM of Citi South Africa, you pointed out earlier that you also are dependent on these foreign inflows into the country. Now, does it keep you awake at night that if we don't see resolution in the global environment and specifically in the Eurozone, that it will impact Citi South Africa?
I think that certainly our business here is very much impacted by what happens in the rest of the world. So I think that to the extent that world growth is threatened by what's happening in Southern Europe, and to the extent that that impacts capital flows into South Africa, yes, our business could be impacted in terms of deal flow, in terms of business momentum, in terms of our revenue growth, et cetera. In terms of the basic health of our balance sheet and our liquidity and our capital position in South Africa, no, we would not be impacted. We're very well capitalized. We have over about 4 billion rand in paid-in capital and retained earnings in South Africa. And
so you've got a suitable war chest. You don't need to reposition the company for a potential double dip scenario.
Not in terms of our balance sheet, but certainly in terms of our business momentum. It will be much more difficult to I think, achieve the revenue targets and the growth targets and the investments we want to make in terms of new products and new business lines if the world were to sink into another recession. It would slow us down in terms of our growth.
I want to come back to your specific leadership style. How would you define that?
Raman, I would say that it varies depending on the circumstance, and it's changed. The role that I had before coming into this role, I was a Chief Operating Officer for Africa, and in that role, because we are a global company and because of the specific tasks that I was responsible for, strategy, the rollout and the execution of strategy, and basically ensuring that we maintained a very robust control environment, then I would say in that instance it was team player but directive. There are global standards that we adhere to, and as a global company, we have to make sure that we adhere to that. But you want to make sure that you have the input of the staff and your colleagues and so forth. In the role that I'm in now, it's quite interesting that it's changed quite a bit, and that in the GM role, I have very strong managers that are managing the various lines of business that we have. And I think in that extent, I'm also a coach player, but much more collaborative. in terms of giving them the scope to manage their business lines and really only engaging when they need.
And has that been easy? Because the art of delegation is an art in itself. Has that been easy for you?
It's easier than I thought. You know, what I've had to do is be very careful about understanding and being open with them on where my help is needed and where it's not needed. And where it's not needed, then I don't need to be engaged. Where it is needed, then I do engage. And what I've focused on as well is really opening up and trying to make the firm much more informal in terms of our town hall gatherings when we get all staff together, making them more participatory where there's other people speaking besides me. I've set up an ideas forum in the firm where we have representatives from the various business areas, and we talk about ideas that come from them, and it ranges from business strategy to housekeeping to technology, a wide range of things.
Having worked all over the world, how do South Africans stack up in terms of work ethic?
Oh, I think South Africans stand up high. I really do. I think if you look at the headlines, we would probably question that. But I think if you look at South Africa, this country has produced some of the greatest leaders this world has ever seen. With Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, you know, you can just keep naming. And I think that gives us all something to be proud of and to be inspired by. And I think we've also led the world in terms of setting governance standards around, you know, the King Commission, and now we're at King 3. So I think that the infrastructure and the standards are there, and I think that the vast majority of companies and individuals follow those standards.
Do you call South Africa your home now?
I do. I do.
Crime, has it ever been a deterrent?
Crime is a worry. I think it's one thing that that is on all of our minds, and I think it is an imperative in terms of the national agenda. I've been very fortunate that I haven't been the victim of a serious crime, but I do take precautions. But I lived in Brazil before I came here, Bronwyn, and I think it's all relative. And I think that, to be very honest with you, yes, crime is a problem, and we all must be concerned and do our part to try to control crime and redress the problem that we have. But after having lived in Brazil, South Africa is not the only country that's dealing with crime. And I think I was rather sensitized to the crime situation, having moved here from a country that also experiences very high levels of crime.
What, in your opinion, are the key challenges that South Africa faces from a business perspective?
I think starting, you know, more broadly, I think the country has to come and address the challenges of how to grow the economy, create jobs, while also redistributing wealth. And if we're dealing in a business environment in that kind of national agenda, then we have the challenge of how do we, in our industry, in financial services, satisfy the very sophisticated needs of the large corporations where we focus most of our business, that have very sophisticated demands, very international type of activity, with the new economy, if you will, where there are new entrants coming in, small businesses, unbanked individuals. So I think that's a real challenge of how do you manage this dual aspect of your target market, because your business model will be very different as you do that.
Donna, you're only the second woman to sit in the Captains of Industry hot seat. Jill Marcus, the governor of the South African Reserve Bank, was the first female. And I didn't have the opportunity to ask her about balance. And I certainly ask all the male captains of industry this question. And they generally have very good support mechanisms behind them. Is that the secret to getting balance right?
You know, I'll be very honest with you, Bronwyn. I think very few people get the balance right, if anyone. I think that it really is a challenge. And I think having a support mechanism is very important. My husband's very supportive, and I do have help. I've got 4 children, so I have a very demanding personal side of my life as well. But I also use what I call the accordion. And there are times in my life, or in a day, or in any specific period of time, where I have to be really focused on my work. And I dedicate myself to my work, and I rely more on that support mechanism. And then there are times when the support mechanism in business, in the bank, can manage things where I can devote a little more time to my family. So I think over a period of time I do balance it out, but I can't tell you that it's balanced within a 24-hour period, if you know what I mean.
With 4 children, are there elements of regret in terms of what you've done to this point, or do you think that you have given enough of yourself to both the business side of things and to your family?
I think I've given enough to both, Bronwyn. I think I do have these moments when I feel, oh, I should be doing more on one side or the other. But I think that the feelings of regret are very negative, and I really want to approach both my parenting and my relationship with my husband and my family in an energetic and positive way, and not one where I'm always trying to compensate. And the same thing with the office. I think that I think I'm very efficient. I really love what I do. I'm very positive. I have a very positive attitude about the success of our business. And I think the core values are very important on both sides in terms of carrying me through. So I try not to focus on regret because I think it's negative and it tends to pull you down as opposed to propelling you forward.
Achieving success in the corporate arena, is there some game playing that needs to take place?
I think so, and I think so, and I don't want this to sound too simple, but I think a lot of it really is based on core values. There's a lot that one can study in terms of management philosophy and management styles. There's a lot of very good and interesting books out there. And I think once you read some of those books, you sit back and say, well, gee, I sort of knew that all along. I think a lot of it is just really resting on solid core values and propelling yourself, taking control of your own life, your own career, and managing as high as your competence and your character will allow you. I think your character, the elements of your character and your values are just as important as your core competence. And I think that's why we see a lot of people that are very competent peak out in their career when you would expect them to go further. I think they just reach a point where their core values get conflicted. Sometimes women, for example, get conflicted in terms of their business values versus their home values. So I think it's equally important, the core competence and also the character and the values.
Have you got more on your corporate agenda?
I am at the moment really enjoying what I'm doing at Citi. I think we have a lot we can still do in terms of growth in this country. I'm very excited about the prospects and the possibilities of our growth agenda. So I'm very dedicated and very excited about what I can do to lead our business forward. And then from there, I'm a fan of emerging markets. I love Africa. So perhaps from there I'll see what else I can do to help further the agenda for Citi in Africa. But for now, I'm very focused on South Africa.